Hello and welcome to Not a Vlog and video 2 of I Do Know What I'm Talking About. I'm Scarlett, and if you've checked out my channel at all, you'll see there are many vlogs. If that's not your thing, or it is and you've still come here, which thank you, then I can at least show you something equally deranged to myself, and that is fanfiction. Yes, today we're talking about fanfiction. Specifically, origins and growths, exposure to the public spotlight, and the darker shadow it casts. I am the first person to ever talk about this. No, you haven't seen it somewhere else. Shh, it's okay. It's okay. We're the only ones. It's fine. But, I was hoping to make myself a little bit different from the totally non-existent other videos about this topic, because I write fanfiction. I know. We'll see what happens. We'll see how you feel by the end of this video. Big admissions coming forward. So I'm 25, and as you can see, fanfiction.net came to be in 1998. And while I totally would have rocked the self-insert Barney and Friends fanfiction if I could understand complex literature at the age of 2 years old, I did not. And you may be here wondering, what is a self-insert? Well, close your eyes and picture yourself with your favorite characters from whatever show, movie, anything, and just, go hang out with them at a juice bar or something. Are you doing it? Congratulations, you've done the self-insert. As it was, I probably started writing fanfiction when I was 11, not posting it, but writing it. And I couldn't tell you what it was, not because I don't want to, which I don't, but because I don't remember and have blocked out all of those cringy parts of life. So, probably if I had to guess, it would be, Kim Possible adventure fanfiction, or, Totally Spies, probably. That was, yeah, it was definitely Totally Spies. But can you blame me? What I specifically remember is the 2010 area, Big Time Rush, Victorious, fanfiction that took over a corner of YouTube for a time. I don't know if you remember that, but it was 4 pixels, screenshots from the TV show, crossovers that lasted 12 parts, and all of these Nickelodeon people just interacting together. What a weird time that was, and I definitely had no part in that. I didn't start actively posting fanfiction until probably about 2012. And like the nerd I am, of course, it was Doctor Who. I'm not embarrassed by that. Rose and the Ninth Doctor are meant to be, and I will never change my mind, so I'm sticking with it. Some supernatural stuff definitely fit in there for a while, but then there was Teen Wolf. Yet again, I'm not gonna be embarrassed by this. Even though I kind of am, I'm not. I'm gonna stand by it. But I really liked that fandom, to be honest. I think that there was a kindness within that group, and it was very receptive to new work. And that show also went off the rails, season, 4? I don't remember. And so it was kind of nice to have a place to go where we could look at the characters and, maybe put them in situations where things were not so terrible. And that sort of brings us to point and part number 1. The good. Before we get into it, a quick rundown of some fanfiction vernacular that I think you need to know. You've got the fandom, which is the thing that you like, so the show, manga, anime, whatever, that's your fandom. You've got the ship, which is the pairing that you like, so the 2 characters that you want to be in a relationship, although there are also friendships, if you will, where it's these are my 2 people that I think should be friends forever. But that's not really the ship that we're talking about with the relationship. Then we have your OTP, which I'm not really talking about in this video, but I think you should know. And that's the ship that's your top ship of all the ships. This is who you want to be together forever. That's your OTP. Then you have tags, so that's fluff, which is super nice, happy things. Angst, which is angst. And then AUs, which is alternate universe, and usually people put characters in the Harry Potter universe or whatever when they have nothing to do with magic. So those are some things that we need to go over before we jump into the mess of things, which is now. Fanfiction is by no means a new concept. Goulier, and I keep wanting to say his name with like a French accent, and I don't know why, like Goulier or something, I don't know. But Goulivier's Travels, which is Jonathan Swift's 1926 book about the voyages of his main character in different places, has led to a lot of fans at the time trying to expand his travels into things that either were not written about in the book originally, or were, but needed some expansion, at least in their own mind. Fan art, poems, and stories all followed that publication. In the 18th century, it actually expanded, so you had things like Samuel Richardson's Pamela in 1740 about a lady's maid and her boss who propositions her all the time, and then she says no. But a lot of the continuations or adaptations made by fans did not have that refutation. So if you can see where I'm going with this, it got a little steamy and completely opposed to the actual source material. As literacy increased in the 1900s, so did fanfiction, although stigma did as well, but we'll touch on that later. Now, it's biggest on Wattpad and Archive of Our Own, although Wattpad also hosts original work, so publications that are completely unrelated to fanfiction, and it's self-published. There are around 6 million works on Archive of Our Own, which is also known as AO3, and about 41.5 million page reads on average per month within 2020's first quarter. They have really thorough data, and I have it linked down below in the others category where I have all my other stuff. So we've got the sources, and then we'll have all of the other sort of things that I referenced but didn't really use. In 2019, AO3 won the Hugo Award, which is a highly coveted sci-fi award, and that was sort of a big turning point in fanfiction because it showed that there was actually a lot of authenticity to what was being written and gave some more credibility to fanfiction as a whole. Well-known authors like Cassandra Clare, S.E. Hinton, Meg Cabot, Neil Gaiman, Naomi Novik, and many others have publicly stated that they have written fanfiction. Novik actually is one of the founders of OTW, which is the Organization for Transformative Works, helps provide legal advocacy for things like fanfiction, fan art, podcasts, all of those things that are fan-made about other source material, and fights on legal cases to put them under the umbrella of free use. So that doesn't mean you get paid for it, but it means that you're allowed to produce it without getting sued for copyright, which is nice. They also have their hands on operating Fanlore, AO3, Open Doors, and the Transformative Works and Cultures. They can defend the work so long as it is proven to be creative and transformative from the original media. So, right on, I guess. Fanfiction is not nearly as hidden as it has been in the past, and especially on places like AO3 helps you create a community of people who like the same things. So I've seen a lot of things like Discord servers and people on Twitter who met doing AO3 fanfiction. And it's a really good opportunity because not everybody in your actual local physical area is going to like the same things that you do. And it just kind of helps make you feel like you belong, especially when maybe sometimes you don't really want to talk about it in your real life. Not that they're, not that you want to be embarrassed by the things that you like, but sometimes it's just easier to talk to people on the internet. Fanfiction allows people to spend more time with the characters they love and also improve their writing and practice by not having to build an entire world, but using the characters to write stories and expand upon their creativity. It's also a much more open LGBTQ place and space than just the general world. So it allows for some representation that you might not see other places, which is desperately needed because, we don't have any real representation for sexuality, gender, race, people with disabilities. Like, in the real world, that's still so slow. And, I say fanfiction like it's not the real world, and obviously it's fiction in the title, but everybody who's writing it is real. And I know there are problems, there are contentious points that come up with this, and we're getting there, I promise. But this is supposed to be the good, so let's just focus on that for just a minute before things get sad, okay? I did just say that it allows people to help practice their writing and not have to write a whole world, but some people do that, and it's sort of amazing. I'm gonna get a little bit into that later, but some people are just they really double down, and they write these beautiful stories. Sometimes, like, directly from the source material in the same world, and sometimes it's kind of hard to pin down to the story, except for character names. But regardless, like, there are some really amazing fanfic writers, and I don't think we can discount everybody by, assuming that because it's not professional writing that it's bad. Some is not great, but there are a lot of really amazing writers who put stuff on AO3 and other websites, and I just want to acknowledge that it's a lot of work. Like, people put so much work into fanfiction, and there's a lot of stigma around it. And so just right now, those sorts of people, I'm gonna give you a shout out because it's amazing. Writing can be a catharsis, and obviously it's not just fanfiction where this is true, but it is a little bit easier when you're already writing your comfort characters, and it helps people like get through bad situations and sometimes learn more about themselves. And I know I certainly wrote some things that were more comforting during COVID, and so I think that it's an important factor of just like expression as well. Sometimes that means that the character goes through some stuff, but that's trauma, you know? It also gives people the opportunity to get near instant feedback through things like kudos and comments, which can be super amazing and motivating, even though sometimes it's not true and sometimes it's not as positive. Although I feel like I'm more likely to see good reviews on bad writing than the other way around, but that could be because of the fandoms that I'm in, and also the ability that people have to delete and, you know, filter certain comments. But I kind of just in this moment want to believe that sometimes people can be nice. Sometimes. Another thing that's really big in the fanfiction sphere is trigger warnings. And there's a lot that goes into this discussion, and I'm going to get into it a little bit. There's so much that I want to say. I think I might end up doing another video about this because when I was starting to do the research for this topic, I just remembered how much there is and how much I feel about this. So I'm going to try to keep it narrow, but we'll see what happens. You can tag individual warnings as a writer or filter them out as a reader, which is really, really nice. And I'm showing you this thing right now, and I'm sure some of you are a little bit uncomfortable just by that one tag right there. But people write lots of things, and at least this gives you the ability to not deal with that if you don't want to. And also, if you think about it, that sort of, you know, content and theme is not uncommon in popularized media and literature, and sometimes it's done well there, and sometimes it's not. And it's the same in fanfiction. Sometimes it's poorly addressed and it's just sort of used as a ploy for something, and you know it ends up in a really unhealthy relationship or something. But like in regular books, sometimes it's done very, very well, and some of the trauma and the ramifications of what happens are addressed, and it's just a really nice piece. So it just sort of depends on what you're reading. It's like everything's layered by quality, honestly, and you can sort of do that on AO3 too. Like, not to say that everything that has the most likes is, you know, the best, or that everything that doesn't is the worst, but you know, there are ways to sort of look through those situations. Trigger warnings are meant to help keep people in a healthy mindset, so sort of let them know what's coming up and avoid certain topics, but sometimes it's not even avoidance. Sometimes it's just to tell people that this is happening. But topics that people might not have good experiences related to in the real world, so like blood, assault, eating disorders, stuff like that, that might be a little personal and a little hard to deal with and to hear. There's been a long-standing debate about whether or not we should use these in, you know, popular publication, but there's been some studies done that say it may or may not be helpful. So a recent one said that trigger warnings do not seem to lessen negative reactions to disturbing materials in students, trauma survivors, or those diagnosed with PTSD. Indeed, some studies suggest that the opposite may be true, because it might lead to anxiety in the process. But this was in a situation where people weren't really able to leave. They just sort of heard that this was going to be happening through the trigger warning, and then they had to sit there and wait and figure out when it was going to happen, how it was going to happen. So it's a little bit different, because at least in books, in things that we consume like that, we have the opportunity to choose what we read for pleasure. So if you were to see something like that, you could just not read the book. and that's where I think that the line is delineated, is we have control in that situation. However, there are people who say that if we keep giving people trigger warnings, then we're just making kids soft and, you know, all of this nonsense. The pros about trigger warnings are that we can help people avoid situations that may be traumatizing, or at least give them an opportunity to make those decisions for themselves, whereas the cons usually revolve around like giving away spoilers or something in the book. But I feel like if the spoilers involve something traumatic, it's not a bad idea to just vaguely say what's happening. And films have been doing this forever. I mean, if you think about it, we've got all of these warnings that come up, like this may be disturbing for some viewers, that kind of a thing. And that doesn't like give away what's going to happen. It just lets people know that, hey, there might be something coming up that you should be prepared for. And also, in film, we have all of the ratings, so G, PG, PG-13, rated R, and I don't think that's a bad idea for books either. We could create a system and figure out what sort of things might fall under those categories, and then just be like, hey, put this in every book. This rating means that these sorts of things could be involved. Just be warned. And then you wouldn't have to give away specifics, but people would be a little bit more aware of what they were getting themselves into. So I've already insinuated some of the bad things that are to come, and I guess it's time we address them. So, part 2, the bad. Even though fanfiction is protected under fair use, there are some authors who are not a fan of fanfiction being written about their work. So you have George R.R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones, Orson Scott Card, who wrote Ender's Game, and Anne Rice, who did the Interview with the Vampire book. They've all said at some point or another that it's not good. I'm not sure if they've at all changed their mind, because a lot of them it was like the earlier 2000s when this was still highly stigmatized. But even if they did change their mind, there are still like contemporary writers who are not a fan. So it's sort of a weird spot. Like, you want to respect the writers who, produced the thing that you like, but, beyond the original creators, there are some places in the fandoms where things get difficult. For one, there are some fandoms that are just a lot smaller than others, and that means that if you're writing in it, you're populating most of the work in that space. And, a lot of people appreciate that, but there can also be some very demanding people, and that's true all around. In fandoms that are even very large, and there are tons of writers putting out content, you might still be getting messages like, hey, when's this work going to be up? I thought you were supposed to update this last month. Very demanding people sometimes. A lot of them are respectful, but some are not. The problem with this is that fanfic writers can't get paid. There's like one very small exception to this rule, and it's something with like a really specific licensing law. And there are other like laws and things around this, but generally speaking, there's pretty much no legal way for fanfiction writers to get paid. And that means that there's all this pressure being put on them to produce something, and it's not going to pay the bills. Sure, that's true of a lot of hobbies, but with enough pressure, it can start to feel like a boss breathing down your neck, and you also just don't like letting people down, Like, this is something that you had as a passion project, and now it's just feeling like a stressor, and that's just not a good way to go about things. Plus, there are some fandoms that are just more toxic than others, and platforms as well that definitely are not as accepting. And, AO3 is generally pretty nice because besides the comment section, there's no, like, social media aspect associated with it. So, because you can filter through the things that you're looking for, you can just go and read the fanfiction that you like and ignore the stuff you don't. But stuff like Twitter and Facebook, not so nice. A big part of that divide is the LGBTQ plus side of things. So fanfic writers do have a tendency to make ships queer. And I say that lovingly as the bacon on the LGBTQ sandwich. But not everybody is a fan of that, and it really can get very hostile if you move on from like AO3 to posting on Facebook about it in one of the groups, or like Twitter. It feels like a different world. Like, you're in this one spot where everything's very accepted, and then all of a sudden it's just like, why are you making these people gay? They're not gay. And it's like, but they could be. The argument then comes from like, they're literally fictional people, to the creators never said that they're gay. And I feel like that's a really representative situation about coming out in general. Because characters are based on people. I mean, not like real people, but they're supposed to be realistic. And humans are learning and growing and discovering and feeling different things all the time. So even if someone doesn't say, hey, this character is gay or bi or demi or whatever, it doesn't mean that they couldn't be, just because they haven't said. Not everyone's come out to you. And there's also nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with the characters being straight. I'm not saying that. Like, I don't want to eradicate straightness from this realm that we're existing in, but I think we also should acknowledge that other kinds of people exist. My point in all of this is, before I get too far away from all of this, is that if you want to write like a gay Harry Potter AU where they're like in college or something, then you go do it. Because J.K. Rowling certainly isn't going to give you a representative story. There's a slippery slope to fanfiction that I feel like I see a lot in like anime fanfic, and I think part of the reason is because they're like drawn figures, and it sort of separates them from reality a bit. And this whole thing is shipping children with adults. And I know that the same argument that I just made a few minutes ago comes to play, which is like, well, yeah, but they're not real. And then to that I say, it's different. It's different. And I'm going to get into it, but there's something else that I guess we have to look at first, which is that anime is Japanese, and in Japan, the age of consent is 13. And while they're trying to raise it up to 16, it's still 13. And for comparison, in the US, it goes by state, but it's like between 16 and 18. And in South Korea, it is 16, as well as the UK. Germany, Italy, and China, it is 14. So, like, I guess the point is that legally it's fine in Japan, technically, because even if it's, like, teacher-student or whatever, usually they're above 13 in these situations. But just because a law exists does not make it good, and the power imbalance that exists here, along with, like, the experience imbalance and just generally the biology, because, you know, teens have either just finished puberty or, you know, are still sort of under the effects of all of that, and brains are still developing a lot at that period of time. I mean, sure, they don't stop until they're 25, so, like, I'm done for, I guess. But it's still a lot happening, and it just, because the law leans that way does not mean everything else should fall in line. I know that this sort of thing happens in other media, like Pretty Little Liars with the whole Arya Ezra thing, and like season 1 Riverdale. But I still say no to that too, sir. No. Bad. But this is when their drawings thing comes back into play. And I understand that it might sound hypocritical because I just before said, like, hey, stuff's not real, so it doesn't matter. But in this situation, I know they're not real children. I know they're not even actors being put in the situation, but real kids do see it. Whether or not you want to, I know there are ratings and stuff that you can avoid in fanfiction, but do we really think that that's happening? Like, no, it's not. And I know part of it is like, you know, the kid's making a bad decision, but I think that should be evidence that they can make bad decisions. I'm not saying that kids are gonna like see this and read this and automatically like romantically have feelings for their teachers, because that's not how things work, but it's also just putting them in a bad situation and setting a stage for something potentially detrimental by romanticizing relationships that are just really not healthy and not okay. And I know a lot of people don't agree with me on this because it's anime and weird stuff happens in anime all the time, but just like age them up. Like, I know there's been some debates about all that too, but I feel like that's just the easiest solution. Like, if it's a high school thing, just make it a university. Give them some like other life experiences, branch your creativity off a little bit, and just make it not illegal. Like, it's not that hard to do that. So, like, when I'm doing cosplay of anime characters, I am a 25-year-old person with a 25-year-old body dressing up as an adult. I'm not trying to make myself look like a child, because that's really weird. I just don't get it. So it makes me very uncomfortable, this whole situation. I'm very uncomfortable, and I want to move on now. Please. Okay. So it's one thing for all of this to be happening to fictional characters. It's a whole nother gambit when it's to real people. And that wouldn't happen, right? It does, all the time. RPF is a thing, real person fanfiction, or real person fiction, but fanfiction. And it's gross. I mean, it happens to like all kinds of celebrities, so like musicians and actors and YouTubers and streamers, and I could give examples, but I kind of don't want to, because I feel like if I do that, I'm almost just as bad as everybody else who's like doing it, and putting the people who are involved, the subjects of these things, into another uncomfortable situation that they never asked to be in. Because sure, they're public figures, but that doesn't mean that we can use them as puppets. They already have enough stuff going on, just being in the public eye. And it just feels really creepy, you know? Like, with any kind of character that doesn't exist, like, you're not really harming them by putting them in very traumatic situations in your stories to get your feelings out. But when you're doing it with real people, it's just kind of like, it just feels really wrong and gross, because these are real people with real feelings and real relationships. And when you're shipping real people with other real people, it's just, there's a lot of potential for things to go wrong, especially because it doesn't always stay in fanfiction. Like, sometimes it permeates into social media and other areas, and then it just is really awkward and bad, and they're being put in really weird situations. So just maybe don't. I'm gonna just, don't do that. And some of them have, like, said it's okay, and other, people sometimes read fanfiction of themselves on, like, TV shows or YouTube and stuff, but just because they're acknowledging it doesn't mean that they're accepting it. And there are definitely different lines on the spectrum of weird here, like putting a celebrity into a situation where, they go hiking in Ireland is not nearly as weird as, like, shipping them with a fellow celebrity. But they're both weird. Just one's a little bit less bad than the other. RPF is not new, though. Remember how I said fanfiction is very old? Well, this is the only one. This is the only RPF that I'm, like, super down for. The Bronte sisters, otherwise known as some of the most prolific writers of their era for things like Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, and Tenant of Wildfire Hall. Wow, I'm struggling. Along with their brother Bramwell, whose name I remember all the time, wrote RPF fics Glasstown was a juvenile work by all four of them, and originally included the Duke of Wellington and Napoleon in a cast of characters in a world that was all their own, and eventually, before it got published, they did, change the characters entirely, so publication, it was completely original, but I just really love thinking about that, okay? That's amazing, and it's the only one that's okay. Really, no fanfiction that's put into a published book is exactly the way that it was when it was written. So you have the After series, which is well documented on YouTube, books and films, and I'm not going to get too far into it because I don't want to. But it's by Anna Todd. There are several books. They're all apparently very long, and the fanfiction was even longer. And the movies are something. But it glorifies, like, emotionally abusive relationships, and it's got, I think, to me, it's like, if your theme involves, like, a bad relationship, so long as at the end of the book, the person is realizing that they shouldn't be in that relationship and is, like, going and making themselves a better life, that's fine. But that is not what happens in these books. But they're also, the reason that it's related here, originally Harry Styles fanfiction, which is just like, come on, I know I don't know him personally, but that ray of sunshine is in no way Scott Harden, whatever his name is, who is, like, a terrible, abusive person, and I refuse to associate the two together. They actually were thinking about making those books into movies earlier on, but there was a Change.org petition that said no, and it was because people both didn't like that it was a glorified fanfiction, and also that it, was putting these sorts of relationships into a positive light, which they should not be in, and I completely agree with that. Although I don't really have a problem with fanfiction becoming published if it's following certain guidelines and is edited properly, and like I said before, there are some stories that are amazingly well written and they start off as fanfiction and they also stay fanfiction. So I don't think it's a bad thing in general, but there are ones that do it poorly, we'll say, and I'll just leave it at that. Even though I know you're thinking, hey, there's one you're missing and it's the big one. Don't worry. Part 3. The horny. If you know anything about fanfiction, you're probably looking at me thinking, you forgot the biggest thing about fanfiction. But I didn't. We're here, and it's gonna be something. And that is that fanfiction is notoriously horny. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the 1740s, wow, I'm jumping 200 years. The 1740s book Pamela ended a little bit differently in a lot of the readers' minds than it did in reality. And that kind of shows that the sort of foundation of fanfiction is also tied into erotica. While plenty of fics are wholesome, or at the very least acceptable for young audiences, there are plenty that aren't. And I don't think that's a bad thing. We have a lot of stigma around sex and sexuality that I don't really think is necessary. So as a concept, totally fine with it. It just, there are some places where it gets a little weird, and a lot of it falls into the same places that we mentioned before. So LGBTQ stigma, explicit scenes depicting minors, and RPF smut. There are a lot of accusations that have been thrown about women fetishizing gay men specifically, because a lot of straight women write gay fanfiction. And I see what the point is, but I also think that's a pretty broad generalization. I don't think that just because you write a gay relationship that means you're fetishizing an entire community of people. You can write something respectfully and not have it in that manner. I think that there are certainly some people who do. I mean, the whole concept of like a gay best friend just proves that we've had a lot of these like weird mindsets about gay men for a really long time, and then, you know, bringing things into this situation, I can see how it would get a little bit weird. But I don't think that that's the universal situation, and I think, you know, just generalizing like that can really shut down a lot of alternate ideas or perspectives, and also just it ignores the fact that sometimes people just want to write relationships that aren't straight. And just having a ship, or like having a few ships that, you know, examine what a character would be like in a different relationship, I don't think that makes that automatically like a fetish. I think part of the problem is that LGBTQ plus relationships are not very popular still in modern media and society. They're not fully accepted. And so it's either looked at as, you know, like, this is a golden rainbow unicorn moment, or this is terrible and awful and I hate it. And I feel like the latter is usually, you know, homophobes. But I know some people just want their characters to be straight, and I feel like I get it, but can't they at least be like questioning, or I don't know, somebody can be gay? Like, statistically, I feel like a lot of the situations in stories, it's like all the characters are straight, and I don't think that that's numerically or statistically true in real life. So I think that just trying to say that all these characters are straight because no one said otherwise doesn't really mean that it's true. And I'm getting off base here, but I just think that once we sort of start to better accept LGBTQ relationships and people into society, we can sort of tackle this problem a little bit better, because right now there's like no representation, and having representation often means like looking at it through the lens of this character is gay, this character is, I don't know, non-binary or trans or something, and we're like, this character is this, as opposed to saying like, this is a character who happens to be non-binary, and this is a story that pretty much has nothing to do with that, but this is a feature of their character and not the crux of it. And there are things like, you know, self-discovery in coming-of-age stories where that is the point, and I think that's fine, and it's good to have those sorts of stories told, but we have so few stories about any sort of diverse character who happens to be something. Somebody who happens to be disabled and goes on some adventure, and that's really not the point of their story, you know? I do, however, think that presuming real human beings to be anything that they haven't said that they are is not a good road to go down. So it's the same kind of argument that I made about RPFs before, but worse. Yeah, it's worse when people try to, like, presume things about real people and then put them in, like, sexual situations with other people. I don't like that. I think that that's just worse. It's even worse when there are children involved, which is a thing that people do, like celebrity children, or at least like teenagers who are still children. I mean, technically, and they just are. In explicit situations, and fanfiction is a thing. and it shouldn't be a thing. I'm not going to say much more on that. I feel like we understand. Now, this issue also comes up in fan fiction about fiction, but people are kind of on both sides of it, and I know it's not unique to fanfic. Like, modern, teen shows have a lot more of this in them than I think there should be shown, but they also don't show it, which fanfiction does. And I don't actually know how in-depth any of it was, but I know in Stephen King's It, they had a scene about that, and a lot of people were upset about it, especially now, saying it is disturbing, sick, and insane. And yet, it still happens in fanfiction. And I don't think it's necessary. Just age them up if that's what you want to do, because it's gross. So there's a fandom here with 204,000 works, and the characters are all in high school. And there are 5,000 fics here that I'm showing you that are marked to fit in this particular category. And there's also a lot of unmarked ones, so we don't really know how many of those fall into that category. And I'm sure not all of them are glorifying it. Maybe there are some that are critical, but then why are you showing it, Just make them older. Another example of no good, very bad things that happen in fanfiction is how sexual assault is written, and consent or lack of consent and stuff. And I mentioned the whole sexual assault thing up earlier, and how sometimes it can be very well addressed, and sometimes it is not. It can go either way. I've gone over this already, but romanticizing it is a thing that happens here, and also in regular books. I'm not saying that it's unique here, but let's not. I feel like this whole section is just me let's not do that. Let's not do it. There are certain things that are totally fine if you want to do them NSFW. I think that's fine, but just make them adult, let there be consent, and if you're doing something that doesn't involve consent, make it the point that that's bad, and have characters deal with the problems that follow. I don't think that the formula is that complicated. I need to stop before I get too heated. Hold on. Consent is sexy, protection is sexy, find a way to fit it into the fic because we need better examples in our media. Anyway, another thing that I think y'all were waiting for here is 50 Shades of Grey. Like After, it originated as a fanfiction, this one of Twilight, and it shows. It is a mess. I know it's very popular, and there are many movies about it, and I know that she, has a character kind of moment where she's not about what's happening, and the whole first book or whatever is her considering this situation and being nope. But throughout the series, then she's oh, actually, this is fine, and I'm in love with him now, even though he's very forceful about this contract. I have very few rights about, what happens in this contract that they're signing, and it's just not a good situation to be put in, and it's he's very stalkerish, and that happens enough in Twilight anyway. He shows up to follow her or whatever. I haven't read the books, but I've watched so many videos talking about them. It's the same as After in a lot of ways, actually, where they're glorifying romantically abusive relationships, emotionally. I don't know about physically. I mean, I guess what's happening technically is because the BDSM community has said a lot of things about how inaccurate the representation of their community is in this book series, and how damaging that can be to people, because a lot of them, this is their first experience with any of that. Basically, the point is just don't write things that glorify bad situations and could put people into dangerous situations if they were to replicate them without proper knowledge. There are so many amazing fics that could be books or are books that are way better than 50 Shades of Grey and do everything right. They have beautiful language and dialogue, amazing scenes, and I think that those are the sorts of things that we need to remember, is that there's so many bad things, but there's also so many amazing, beautiful things that you can find in fanfiction. In the end, fanfiction is a love letter to the original media. Sure, sometimes we want to go back and fix things, and that's why we're writing it, but you have to like the original content enough to try to fix it to begin with. And yes, things can get very dicey, and there are certain things that we definitely have to change about fanfiction in the community, but also the stigmas in real life, both about fanfiction overall, but everything about the LGBTQ world and diversity is something that we have to tackle. And I know that's a lot, and it sounds like a lot to say just for something like fanfiction, but when you have good representation and things are well written and you can actually continue on with stories and characters you love, I think that's amazing. And in a world where things have been so divisive lately and just hostile, I think we can all take a minute to sit back and enjoy some fluffy fanfiction. Thank you guys so much for watching if you're still here with me. I know it's still November, and so I wanted to do something kind of similar in the writing sphere to NaNoWriMo because, as I said, there are many vlogs that I've been doing, so if you're interested in the whole writing thing, maybe look at those if you want to. Just saying. But yeah, I wanted to try to keep it on theme, but tackle something that's just, it's big, and there were so many things that I did not fit into this, and I tried to hit on a lot of the key points. I know I'm missing things, but there's so much, okay? So much, and that's why if I sound a little incoherent before at times, I'm just trying to process everything because I have a lot of feelings about it, and I've been involved for so long that I didn't want to be blinded by my feelings towards fanfiction because I know there's a lot of downsides. So what's your take on fanfiction? Is there a fandom that you like, a ship you like? Do you hate fanfiction? Tell me why. But also just be kind about it, yeah? Because we're all trying to live our lives and be happy, and that's what I want for all of you, is to just take a deep breath, have some water, tell me what you think about fanfiction. And also if you have any suggestions, because I have a whole list of things I want to write about, and now apparently I'm going to be writing about trigger warnings because that was something that I came up with in this whole video situation. If you like this video, give the thumb a tap, ding the bell like it's Liberty, but try not to break it, and maybe give me a follow, because we have all those things going on that I just talked about. I will see you later today probably with my vlog for the day, but until then, sweet dreams!